My brother pretended to be homeless and asked for my help, but the twist? He was actually a millionaire hiding his wealth to see who in the family he could trust. I don't even know how to start this. I've told this story to a few friends, hoping someone would tell me I'm overreacting, that maybe I missed something, or that there's some silver lining here. But I'm telling you now because I need it out of my head. To start, I'm Farah. I'm 37, a dental hygienist in Pittsburgh, and I've got a younger brother, Lyle. Now, Lyle's always been a character. Growing up, he was the charming one, silver-tongued, a classic smooth talker. The type of kid who'd get into trouble at school but could charm the principal into thinking he was innocent. Teachers, classmates, even strangers at the grocery store adored him. He was the golden child in our family, and as much as I loved him, there was always this sense that he could do no wrong. When we were kids, it was just the two of us against the world. Our parents were loving but stretched thin, working long hours to keep food on the table and bills paid. Mom worked as a cashier at a grocery store, and Dad was a mechanic. Money was tight, but we got by. Lyle and I shared a tiny bedroom, built forts with blankets, and played until Mom had to practically drag us to bed. It was a good childhood, one I thought he appreciated, too. But when he left for college, he barely looked back. He became this ghostly presence in my life, an occasional phone call, a sporadic holiday visit, but never anything lasting. So imagine my shock when, out of nowhere, Lyle showed up at my doorstep 3 months ago, looking like he'd been through a war. It was late on a Thursday night. I just finished doing the dishes and was about to head to bed when I heard a knock. I thought maybe it was a neighbor or even someone trying to sell something. But when I opened the door, there he was, my brother, the golden child, the one who was supposed to be off in Boston living his high-flying life. He looked like a stranger. His hair was messy, his clothes were wrinkled and stained, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. He was thin, gaunt even, with dark circles under his eyes and a twitchy, haunted look I'd never seen before. Farah. I need your help, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Lyle? I could hardly believe it was him. What happened? Are you okay? He looked down, almost ashamed. I've lost everything. Everything, Farah. I don't know where else to go. I felt a pang of shock and sympathy. This was Lyle. Lyle, who'd always had everything under control. Lyle, who'd bragged about big city life and high-stakes business deals. And here he was, practically falling apart in front of me. I didn't ask many questions at first. I could see he was struggling to keep it together, so I just pulled him inside and wrapped him in a hug. You're safe here. Let's get you something to eat. You look like you haven't had a meal in days. I made him a quick sandwich, and he devoured it like he hadn't eaten in weeks. After he'd eaten and settled down a bit, I sat across from him at the kitchen table and looked him in the eyes. What happened, Lyle? How did you end up here? He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he set down his glass. It's complicated. I was working on this business deal, a startup. It was supposed to be big, like, life-changing big. I poured everything into it, Farah. All my money, my savings. I even took out loans to keep it afloat. He rubbed his eyes, looking down at the table. And then, it just crashed. Everything. Overnight. Investors pulled out, the market went sour, and I lost everything. Everything? I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. What about your apartment? Your car? You had savings, right? He shook his head, giving a bitter laugh. Gone. All of it. I had to sell my apartment just to cover some debts. I sold my car, everything I had of value. I tried couch surfing with friends, but after a while, I realized. No one really wants a broke, homeless guy sleeping on their couch. Not for long, anyway. My heart broke for him. Here was my brother, this person I'd looked up to for so long, reduced to practically begging for a place to sleep. Without a second thought, I told him he could stay with me as long as he needed. I set him up in the guest room and assured him we'd figure things out. Family helps family, right? And if anyone deserved a second chance, it was Lyle. The first few days, he barely came out of his room. I'd leave him food outside his door, and he'd eat in silence. I could hear him pacing sometimes, mumbling to himself, as if he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. I tried not to pry. I figured he'd talk when he was ready. Finally, after a week of tiptoeing around each other, I decided to confront him. We were both sitting in the living room one evening, and I asked him point blank, Lyle, what's the plan here? I don't mind helping you, but you can't just hide out in that room forever. He looked at me, almost offended. I just need a little time, Farah. I'll get back on my feet. I just need to figure out my next move. Lyle, I'm not asking you to have it all figured out, but maybe you could pick up a part-time job? Just to start bringing in some money. You can't just stay here indefinitely. He scoffed, shaking his head. Farah, I'm not working at some fast food place or retail shop. I'm educated. I've built companies. I just need time to regroup. I can't be flipping burgers. I bit my tongue. Part of me wanted to tell him that, at this point, a job is a job, but I let it slide. I didn't want to push him too hard. Weeks went by, and nothing changed. Lyle became a fixture on my couch, binge-watching TV shows and ordering takeout with money he somehow scrounged up. Every time I brought up the idea of him finding a job, he'd brush me off, claiming he was close to a breakthrough or just waiting for the right opportunity. It was like he'd become a ghost of his former self, there in body, but not in spirit. Then, one night, I'd had enough. I'd come home from a long day at work to find my kitchen a mess, food wrappers everywhere, and Lyle passed out on the couch. I woke him up, unable to hide my frustration any longer. "Lyle, this has to stop," I said, my voice tight with anger. "You've been here for 2 months. I've tried to be patient, but you're not even trying. You can't just sit around and do nothing." He looked at me, genuinely hurt. "Do you think I'm doing this on purpose? You think I want to be this pathetic?" I softened a bit but didn't back down. "I know you're going through something, but Lyle, you're not the only one with responsibilities here. I can't carry you forever." There was a long silence. Finally, he stood up and grabbed his things. "Fine. I don't need this. I don't need anyone's pity." And just like that, he walked out the door, leaving me standing there in shock. I didn't hear from him for weeks after that. I tried calling, texting, nothing. He'd vanished. I figured maybe he'd gone to another friend's place or maybe even found a job somewhere. But there was this nagging feeling that something was wrong. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from my cousin Jane. "Farah, you're not going to believe this, but I saw Lyle. In New York. He was asking for money. Like, on the street." My heart dropped. "Are you sure it was him?" "Yes, Farah. It was him. He looked rough. Really rough." I couldn't believe it. My brother was panhandling in New York City? This was the same Lyle who once bragged about his 6-figure salary, the Lyle who'd always told me he'd never stoop to doing anything beneath him. I didn't know what to feel: anger? Pity? Disappointment? Another month went by with no word from Lyle. I'd almost resigned myself to the idea that I'd never hear from him again when he called me. It was late, and he sounded different. Calmer, somehow, more grounded. "Farah," he said, "can I come see you?" "Lyle. After everything, I don't know if." "Please, Farah. I need to explain. It's not what you think." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I needed closure, or maybe just answers to the thousands of questions swirling in my mind. The next day, he showed up, but this time, he looked completely different. He wasn't in rags or looking homeless. In fact, he looked polished. Not flashy like before, but there was a confidence, an air of wealth that I couldn't ignore. I sat him down, and before I could even ask, he launched into his story. "Farah, I lied to you. About everything." He took a deep breath. "I never lost my money. The startup? It didn't fail. I staged everything." I was too stunned to respond. "Staged? Everything? What are you talking about?" "It was a test," he said, looking me dead in the eye. "I needed to know who in my life would be there for me if I ever lost everything. I needed to see who I could trust." I could feel my jaw drop. You put me through all of that just to see if I'd help you? Are you kidding me?" He nodded, almost looking proud of himself. "I needed to know, Farah. You wouldn't understand. But I needed to know if people were with me for the right reasons. This was the only way." I stared at Lyle, struggling to wrap my head around what he'd just said. This whole thing, his ragged appearance, his homeless act, everything, had been a twisted loyalty test. I couldn't believe the depth of his manipulation. "So, let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You pretended to be homeless, to be broke, to see who in the family you could trust?" He nodded, totally unashamed. "I had to, Farah. How else would I know who was really there for me? You wouldn't believe how many so-called friends turned me away, how many family members couldn't even spare a couch." I shook my head, feeling sick. "But you lied, Lyle. You lied to me, to everyone. And what did you think you'd gain from this? Money can't buy back trust." He shrugged, looking almost bored. "Look, I had to know. And in the end, I found out you were the only one who really cared, Farah. You passed the test. That's why I'm here." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check, sliding it across the table toward me. I glanced down. It was a check with my name on it for an amount that could pay off my mortgage and then some. "This is my way of saying, thank you," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I pushed the check back, my jaw clenched. "I don't want your money, Lyle. I wanted my brother. But now I see. He doesn't exist anymore." For a split second, I saw a flash of surprise in his eyes, but he quickly covered it up with a smirk. "You're angry now, but one day, you'll understand. You'll see this was all for the best." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "No, Lyle, I won't. What you did was cruel. You took advantage of my kindness and made me believe you were in real trouble. You stayed in my home, ate my food, used my resources, and lied to my face every single day. Family doesn't do that. He shrugged again. If you don't want the money, fine. But don't act like you wouldn't have done the same if you were in my shoes. It took everything in me not to yell at him. You know what, Lyle? Maybe you're right. Maybe you just brought out a side of me I didn't know was there. I stood up, leaving the check on the table, and went to the door. It's time for you to leave, Lyle. I don't want anything more from you, not your money, not your games, and certainly not your tests. Go live your life however you want, but stay out of mine. He stood up, sighing like I was the unreasonable one. Fine. Just know, you're going to regret this. You're turning down an opportunity most people would kill for. Goodbye, Lyle. He walked out the door, not even glancing back. I closed it, feeling a strange mixture of relief and fury. But something clicked inside me. Lyle was arrogant, too confident. He thought he could get away with anything, and he'd just shown me that money and manipulation were the only things he respected. The wheels in my mind started turning, and an idea formed. If he wanted to test loyalty, maybe it was time he got a taste of what real consequences look like. Over the next few weeks, I did some digging. I started reaching out to old family friends, cousins, even some former colleagues of Lyle's who'd fallen out of touch with him. I told them everything, how Lyle had pretended to be broke and homeless to test the family, how he'd been hiding his wealth just to manipulate people. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Word spread fast, faster than I could have imagined. And people were furious. Then, I took it a step further. I found out where he was working as a silent partner in his so-called successful tech company. I knew from his past brags that he was keeping a low profile because he had some risky investments. He didn't want anyone to know he was involved in this specific company in case things went south. He'd said that himself a few years back when he was gloating over Thanksgiving dinner. It was a small startup in Boston, but one that had just enough of a reputation that a little negative press could ruin him. I sent a carefully worded anonymous email to the investors in that company, letting them know about Lyle's character test and how he'd used it to manipulate people. I may have exaggerated a few details, like how he'd tested his partners by misleading them about his finances and potentially played them, too. It wasn't a complete lie, just a subtle twist on the truth. I never thought they'd actually believe me, but apparently, his behavior wasn't as private as he thought. Rumors spread fast, especially when it came to Lyle's arrogance and recklessness. Soon after, Lyle's precious startup began to crumble. Investors pulled out one by one, citing trust issues with key partners. Lyle's name got dragged into the mess, and he couldn't keep a low profile any longer. People started distancing themselves from him. The company began bleeding money, and his partners turned on him, looking for someone to blame. A few months later, I got a text from him. Just one line. "Why would you do this to me?" I didn't reply. What could I say that he'd understand? He'd orchestrated this twisted game to test me, and all I'd done was show him what it felt like to be on the other side of betrayal. But it wasn't over yet. I heard from our cousin Jane that Lyle had been forced to sell his fancy apartment and his expensive car, just to cover his mounting debts. He was back to square one, scrambling to stay afloat. I imagined him, going through the same desperation he'd pretended to feel when he knocked on my door. This time, though, it wasn't a game. This time, he was genuinely struggling, and no one was rushing to help him. Eventually, I got one last message from him. It was a voicemail, his voice a shadow of its former self, pleading, almost desperate. "Farah. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I never thought. Look, I know I messed up. I just need someone I can count on. Please call me back." But I never did. It was a sweet, quiet victory, knowing he'd finally tasted his own medicine.